Welcome to Public Report. My name's Jeanette Richardson, and today our guest is Isral DeBruin. He's the Manager of Communications for Schools That Can Milwaukee. Our issue is education in schools, and the topic is growing high-quality schools in Milwaukee. Hi, Isral. So good to have you today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Now tell us about yourself and your position as the Manager of Communications and Development of the Schools That Can Milwaukee.
Sure. Well, as you said, my name is Isral DeBruin, and I'm a lifelong Wisconsin resident. Been living here in Milwaukee for the past 10 years. Initially, I started off as a journalist covering suburban education, including the schools here in the Brookfield area. And from there, really got a front row seat to some of the educational inequities in our area, where kids who grow up just a couple miles apart might as well be worlds apart, educationally speaking. And so that kind of drove me to seek a way to make a more direct impact. And so I got directly into teaching through the Teach for America program. So I taught for 3 school years in Milwaukee, and from there joined the team at Schools That Can Milwaukee, where I've been for the past 2 years. So our work as an organization is really focused on creating more great schools for the kids and families that need them most.
Well, give us even a more in-depth overview of the Schools That Can Milwaukee and its vision for the future.
Sure. So we're working toward a day when every child in Milwaukee has access to a great school. But we believe that in order to get there, we need to hit a first step, a tipping point, a critical mass for change. And so we have set this goal of 20,000 students in high-quality Milwaukee schools by 2020. So we definitely want every kid in Milwaukee to have access to a great school like that. But we think that when we get to 20,000, that's going to be enough where everyone in Milwaukee is either going to have a child in a great school or they're going to know somebody who has. And that's going to allow our community to see and experience and truly believe what's possible for low-income kids in school and start to demand the kind of quality that actually makes a difference for kids and equips them for life success.
How is that going to look as far as the journey to getting there?
Yeah, so the destination, as I said, is 20,000 kids in high-quality schools by 2020. And to get there, we've got 3 strategic pathways, we call them. So the first one is to identify schools that are already doing really well, existing high-quality schools. And we work with them to figure out how they can grow and expand to serve more kids. Most of our work, though, is with other schools that are working hard to become high quality. And so about half of our budget, more than half of our staff headcount goes toward that strategic pathway. So that looks like on-the-job school leadership coaching. It looks like monthly professional development. It looks like visits to high-quality schools in the Milwaukee area and other places around the country so that these leaders who are doing this really hard work every day can see what it looks like when it's being done well. And then our third pathway is recruiting talent and innovation for Milwaukee. So that's focused on finding folks here in the city and helping raise them up to become great school leaders, and also recruiting people from around the country who want to come be a part of what we're doing here.
Can you share with our viewers some of the misconceptions about the schools in Milwaukee?
Well, I'd say the biggest misconception is that folks frequently believe that there are no good schools in our city, that schools in Milwaukee are just wholesale failing. And I can tell you that that's absolutely not true. We've got excellent schools in Milwaukee that are in all 3 of what we call our school sectors. So we've got the traditional public schools, Milwaukee Public Schools, those district schools that most people are familiar with. There are excellent schools that are run by MPS. There are also excellent charter schools, which are those independent schools authorized by a government entity. And there are also excellent schools that are participating in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, the voucher program. The problem is there's also really bad schools, frankly, in all 3 of those categories. And so I think what people get hung up on is that they frequently hear the doom and gloom, and there's plenty of it out there, and so it's understandable why those are the headlines. But what people miss is that we've got great schools in each of those sectors, and we've got a building movement of people and of organizations that are working together to get better, to improve those schools so that they're delivering the kinds of outcomes that our students deserve.
Now talk to us about the collaboration of leaders, charter schools, and nonprofits and how it's helping the city of Milwaukee.
Yeah. So I'm sure that it's very familiar to you and probably to your viewers as well that there's a lot of animosity between those school sectors, and it's something that we've kind of made our mission is to tear that down. And I believe in the 5 years that we've been around, we've made some significant progress there, and we're up to about 200 leaders, a little over 200 leaders that we're working with in about 40 schools citywide. And these leaders represent all of those types of schools, but we're bringing them all together in the same room at least once a month, oftentimes more than that, to work together, to share their resources, to share ideas, to welcome one another into their schools. And these are folks who maybe a few years ago would never have had the opportunity to talk together because they just wouldn't have found themselves in the same room. Or maybe if they would have, there would have been that political tension going on. And so our focus is if we can set aside all of that stuff, all of the politics, all of the adult oriented priorities, and really reorient our focus to be on kids and on quality, that we're going to be able to get better together a lot faster than we could get better by ourselves. And that's an idea, that focus on kids, that's an idea that appeals to a lot of people, because I think anyone who gets into education, no matter what part of education they're in, that's why they're in it. You know, and so when that's our message, that we want to do this for children, that resonates.
How are you helping the parents, become confident in Milwaukee school systems?
Sure. Well, a big part of my role as the manager of communications and development for the organization is helping to share the stories of our schools and get the word out so that parents, but also members of the business community, members of the philanthropic community, maybe folks whose children are already grown but live in or around the city, so that all of these people can start to experience firsthand or through the news media stories of success, so that they can start to see that this is something that's changing and it's getting better. But we also work a lot with our schools to help them improve. I mentioned our school leadership coaching, and a big focus of that is on helping our schools figure out what meaningful parent engagement looks like for them. So one of our schools I'm thinking of is an MPS school, a traditional district school called Carver Academy, that's actually very close to our office where we work on the near north side. And they instituted a series of family nights that were themed differently, but really focused on just bringing as many parents into the school as possible. And they were really successful. And so they've kind of tried to take the days they've got that would typically be used for parent conferences or open house and things like that, and still fulfill those functions, but reimagine them in ways that draw parents in and really help these parents have a positive experience with school.
Well, talk to us about the pathways to transformation.
Yeah. So the three pathways really begins with helping schools improve, okay? And so I mentioned that a couple of times with our focus on just identifying schools that have a lot of potential and know that they need to get better, and coming alongside them to help them figure out what that looks like and move forward on that improvement plan. Once they are at that high quality level, our work with them turns to helping them become bigger so that they can serve more kids and serve more families. And to help make that possible, we need a steady supply of excellent leaders for our schools, because if a school is going to expand, if they're going to open a second campus, they need a great principal at that top spot to help set the vision, recruit and retain great teachers. And if we have schools that are improving, a lot of times that means that they need additional administrative support to handle things like student discipline or writing curriculum. And so that's that third pathway that I mentioned, recruiting talent and innovation for the city. So we've got two programs that help train up aspiring teacher leaders or folks who have an interest in becoming a principal, and we help them kind of dip their toe into the water a little bit and see if that's something for them. And if it is, we have a partnership program with Alverno College that can actually get them licensed to be principals.
In that pathway, what are you doing to help the parents become more engaged and more involved?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, our work with parents really happens through our schools and through our school leaders. Our direct point of contact with the education system is almost exclusively with principals and their leadership teams, as well as lead teachers. So our interaction with parents more looks like helping to empower those folks to do their jobs in a way that are going to be able to draw parents in and meet families' needs.
Now, what are some of the benchmarks that qualify a school to be considered a successful school?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot, and it's a great question, because when people talk about a good school, it doesn't necessarily mean we're all on the same page, right? And so we think of three key ingredients when we talk about a great school. So first, you have to have an excellent school culture, meaning your building needs to be a place where kids and adults actually want to be every day, right? It's joyful, it's warm, there are high expectations, but there are structures and supports to help students and adults meet those expectations. Your building also needs to be filled with a dedicated team of professionals, high quality staff members who are willing to do whatever it takes to help their students be successful. And then third, your building needs to have strong academic structures and support that ensure that in classrooms, meaningful work is happening, right? That students are actually learning, they're engaging with rigorous content. And when you've got those three ingredients, what you find is it yields noticeable and quantifiable results. So we're talking about high attendance rates, we're talking about transformational student achievement measured by standardized test scores. So where we would expect students to grow a year in a school year's time, because many of our schools are working with students who come in behind, they need to move their students more than a year in a year's worth of time. So when these schools have these three great things in place, this culture, the team of adults, and the structures and supports, in some cases their students are growing a year and a half to 2 years in a single school year. Now, I always stop at this point and I make sure that people understand that exclusively having high test scores is not what we're talking about when we're talking about a good school. It's much more holistic than that. But test scores are an important indicator. If you've got a great school, you probably have great test scores as a result of all the other stuff that makes your school good.
What are some of the things you're doing to recruit good talent to help you with this mission?
Yeah, a big part is introducing people to Milwaukee. When we're talking about recruiting people from around the country, a lot of folks either have no real knowledge of what Milwaukee is like, or they have a really outdated perception of our city, and they just haven't been here recently or at all. They've still got the outdated kind of 70s and 80s Milwaukee in their minds, and it's a different place. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening here. There's a very vibrant art scene, for example. There's a lot happening in education. There are a lot of opportunities to be developed and to advance. And so one of the big things that we do to help recruit people here is just introduce them to the city. So this spring, for example, we're going to be hosting a weekend-long recruitment event where we're going to be getting people here from across the country. And a lot of it's going to be focused on helping them understand the education system here and what opportunities are available, what open positions at schools that we support. But part of it also is just going to be getting them out into the city so that they can see what this place is like, so they can start to size it up and ask themselves, is this a place that I could consider moving to and sticking with? Because that's our focus with recruitment, is we want people who are going to come here and stay here, right? Not just come here for a couple of years and then move on for something bigger and better somewhere else. And so a lot of our focus is on finding people who have some sort of Milwaukee tie already, because it's a little easier to pitch them on the idea of moving here if they've got friends and family who are already in the area.
Well, share some of the positive outcomes of the schools that can Milwaukee.
Yeah, so I actually just finished about a month ago writing our year-end report, which is available on our website, and I got to think through and write out a lot of these great stories. So I can tell you a couple. So the first one, I'm going to go back to that school I mentioned earlier, Carver Academy, which is a traditional district school. That's a school we've been working with now. I believe we're entering our third year with them. When we started working there, it was a pretty rough place. It was very chaotic. I've heard stories from staff members there of things being thrown out the windows on a regular basis. And this past year that we just completed, they led our network of 40 schools in growth on their reading test. So students grew from the fall to end of year more in reading than any other school in our network, which is incredible. Another school on the south side, St. Martini Lutheran School, which is a choice school, part of the Lumen Schools network, their students posted a year and a half of growth in math and a year and 1.6 years in reading. So again, just incredible transformational growth.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap this up, but before we wrap things up,
Yes.
let our viewers know how they can find out more information.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the first place to go is our website, and that's stcmilwaukee.org. So STC, like schools that can, Milwaukee.org. And once you're there, it's very easy to sign up for our newsletter, so you can stay up to date on everything that's happening with us. There are also links to our Twitter and Facebook pages.
Well, Isral, thank you so much for being our guest.
Yes, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Public Report. My name is Jeanette Richardson, and today our guest was Isral DeBruin. He's the manager of communication for the schools that can Milwaukee. The issue, education in schools, and our topic, growing high-quality schools in Milwaukee. Thanks again for joining us.
Hello and welcome to Public Report. I'm Jackie Cullimer, your host. In the studio with us today are Sue McKenzie. She is the director of Rogers in Health, and Mary Madden, executive director of NAMI Waukesha. Our issue for this segment is health, and our topic is reducing the stigma of mental illness. Well, Sue and Mary, thank you very much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Let's start with you, Sue. Would you like to just tell us about yourself and your position with Rogers in Health?
Sure. So I'm at Rogers in Health, which is a relatively new organization within Rogers Behavioral Health System. And we have a laser focus on reducing the stigma around mental health within Rogers itself, but really focused on the whole community and statewide.
And Mary?
Thank you. I'm the executive director of NAMI Waukesha, and NAMI Waukesha is a grassroots organization, and we provide support, education, and advocacy for people affected by mental illness. We work primarily with families and people with lived experience to help them manage the road to recovery.
Okay, now can you tell us about the stigma that those who have had mental illness face?
Well, if you ask the people themselves, they would say that they have experienced stigma in healthcare, and plenty of the research points to things like showing up in an emergency room for maybe you have a heart condition and you have medications, psychiatric medications on your chart, and people tend to get less care, more inappropriate care, because people make assumptions about someone who is using psychiatric medication. So that would be healthcare, employment, housing, faith communities. People who have lived with mental illness report that they are looked at differently, and maybe even the expectations for the satisfaction of their lives is lessened, even as much as having people within the mental health field suggest that their life will be less because of the challenges they face. It's actually not true.
Right, exactly. And if you look at it from a family perspective, and I am also a family member with loved ones who live with mental illness, the family is often shunned by friends. They're afraid to talk to people about it. Even within the family unit, there's other family members who don't understand. There's a perception that you should be able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and get on with your life, rather than that this is a real illness that needs treatment.
Why is it important to develop approaches to counteract the stigma?
Well, one of the things that we've learned at WISE, which is a statewide coalition that Mary and I are a part of, and I'm actually one of the staff people too, is, again, looking at research, that many of us over the years, with very good intent, spent a lot of time and effort trying to help people understand mental illness itself, but we didn't spend enough time helping people understand recovery and the path to recovery and the hope around mental illness. And so what we found is that you may be doing something out of good intent that actually increases stigma instead of decreases it. And when we all realize that together, As peer professionals, we decided we wanted to come together statewide and be sure that we were doing the best out of the research to reduce stigma.
And another issue is we know that early intervention is absolutely key to recovery, and will give a better chance for recovery to happen. And stigma causes people to not want to go get help. Often they don't want to be known as someone living with a mental illness or all those negative connotations. So they resist sometimes going to get help for issues, especially parents taking young children, adolescents who might start exhibiting mental health issues because of the stigma.
So how are both NAMI Waukesha and Rogers in Health addressing this?
So Rogers in Health basically focuses our work in two areas. One is we do a lot of interviewing of people who are living in recovery with mental illness and share their stories so that others can see the real hope and across a diverse perspective of people. And those videos are free and accessible on our website for anyone to use, from a college professor to a family member to share with others. And then we provide the staffing to WISE, this statewide coalition.
In NAMI Waukesha, what we do is we provide education to the local community and surrounding counties that need it as well. One of the things that we do is an In Our Own Voice program, which is two people with lived experience who will go out and talk with a group about their lived experience and how they came to accept their illness and recovery and things like that. The other thing that we do is we educate families to reduce the stigma, the community at large, and I think one of the most important things we're doing is educating our law enforcement. We do crisis intervention training, and a big part of that training is teaching them about the stigma and the preconceived notions and introducing them to people with lived experience who are in recovery, because they tend to get a biased view because the police generally interact with individuals when they're in crisis.
Now, how do you then work with other organizations to help them think strategically about what will work?
So what we know works is for very local efforts to happen. You know, we used to think about public service campaigns that would, be across the country or across the state. And what we know, and I guess I would ask you and your viewers to think about this, if you have a fear or a misunderstanding about somebody, the best way for you to get over that is to get to know that person. And so it's very much at a personal level. And so we work with organizations, if I think about a local church, for example, who wants to be involved in kind of changing the stigma of mental health, we would work with them to understand this model, how to be very targeted in their efforts, how to use these credible stories, and by credible stories what I mean are peers. So the more someone is like me, the more I'm going to be impacted by their story. So we help them to make those kinds of choices, and then to really think about, well, how would I know if stigma was lessened in my church? So first of all, I have to have a pretty honest conversation about what does stigma look like within my church, and how do we want our church members to behave differently. And so we work with them to be strategic rather than just do something like before I mentioned that might actually have a negative outcome when they had very good intentions.
Must those who have recovered often make decisions about if and when they will talk about it?
Yeah, as Mary talked about, the In Our Own Voice program is a fantastic program throughout NAMI, really throughout the United States, and lots of different NAMI sites across Wisconsin. And what we know is that before someone makes a decision to share their story publicly, they begin by making those early decisions of, do I tell grandma at Christmas? Mm-hmm. What do I say at work? If I feel like I need some accommodations at school, what will happen if I talk to people at school about it? How will they treat me? So we work with organizations to help them to figure out, how do we support people in those early stages? And then eventually, many of them will make that very public decision to work to reduce stigma. But it's just as important to every decision someone makes daily about, and they need to be safe decisions, because it's not appropriate to talk to everybody and tell them everything. And so we believe people need to be supported in that process.
Can you talk about positive experiences people have had and when they've seen that stigma reduced in their lives?
Sure, I can talk about that. We interface with families and individuals with lived experience every single day, and we also, we get calls from them, or they just drop in the office and really struggling with an issue, either about telling an employer or telling somebody at school, and we'll sit down and we'll talk about, what it might mean to do that, and that it's really their decision if they're going to disclose or not. And we often have them call us back and say, that was the best decision that I made in my life. They were so supportive, and this is a weight off my shoulders, absolutely. And I would say, without exception, every time we do an educational piece out in the community, somebody decides to disclose at that educational piece, and it is always such a powerful, powerful experience for everybody who is attending.
One quick story, there's a woman who's on our website who shares her story, a long story of living with bipolar disorder and her struggle to find effective treatment. And she chose to tell her story in her 50s, and so her video is out there and she shared it with others. And she said for the first time in her life, she heard out of her mother's mouth, "I'm so proud of you." That's huge. Mm-hmm. And most people worry, if I tell my story, people will think negatively of me. But if it's a strategic and careful decision, we don't find that to be true.
Exactly.
Now, where can people get information and help about seeing the stigma reduced?
Well, from NAMI Waukesha, and there are NAMIs in most of our local communities here in Wisconsin. They can absolutely call and ask for an educational program. We do one-on-one education. Sometimes if they're looking for stigma reduction in a family, maybe there's certain family members who won't come for an educational class or a presentation. But we will do that one-on-one. But we do presentations for people, as I said, in the community, in our own voice, at our high schools, at our colleges, and in surrounding communities. There's also NAMI Greater Milwaukee that does a lot of those. And there's the NAMI Wisconsin website really could connect somebody to their local NAMI, and there would be an array of programs that they could choose from to reduce stigma.
And I did not ask you this at the beginning. What does NAMI stand for?
So NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it was actually started right here in Wisconsin in 1979, and as a grassroots organization by family members, and continues to be the largest grassroots organization in the country with over 1,200 affiliates.
And I just wanted to say, for organizations that are interested in taking a look at how to reduce stigma, they could contact us through the phone number that you have in the website at rogersinhealth.org. And at WISE, we would offer that consultation to them for free.
What would you like to say to someone who may be watching and is struggling with stigma? What hope can you offer them?
I think it's just so very hopeful. Number one, I would say, take a risk to move beyond your self-stigma or your false beliefs that you might hold around mental illness, and get to know someone living in recovery. If you can't access someone directly, personally, go to the website and listen to some of the stories there. We all ought to have hope around this issue, and it's pretty understandable why we don't, because for years we haven't shared those stories of hope because stigma has kept us more in that secrecy area.
I couldn't have said it better. Recovery is possible, and find somebody and hear their story, and it will offer the hope. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
We've been speaking with Sue McKenzie, Director of Rogers in Health, and Mary Madden, Executive Director of NAMI Waukesha. Our issue for this segment has been health, and our topic, reducing the stigma of mental illness. Thank you very much for watching Public Report.
The material on this program does not necessarily reflect the views of WWRS.